Hello viewers, welcome to my YouTube channel. Get ready for heart-touching stories. Don't forget to subscribe and let's begin.
The call came on a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray, unremarkable Tuesday that exists only to deliver bad news. Maya was standing in the airport in Denver, her carry-on bag slung over one shoulder, a lukewarm coffee in her hand when her phone buzzed with a number she recognized but never enjoyed seeing: Gerald Hutchins, property manager, Eastbrook Residential. She almost let it go to voicemail. She had a gate to get to, a flight to catch, and a client presentation in Seattle that she'd been preparing for the better part of 3 weeks. But something instinct guilt, the particular anxiety that comes with renting, made her swipe to answer. Maya. Gerald's voice had the texture of someone who had been having the same uncomfortable conversation all morning and hadn't gotten better at it. How are you? In an airport, Gerald. What's up? A pause, the kind of pause that costs money. I'm looking at your unit's power usage for the last billing cycle, he said. And I have to be honest with you, the numbers are a little alarming. Maya set down her coffee on a nearby ledge. What do you mean alarming? Your electric bill came in at $412. Gate announcements blurred into background noise. Maya replayed the number in her head, turned it over, examined it from different angles, hoping it might mean something different from a new perspective. It did not. Gerald, she said slowly, I travel for work. I was home maybe 20 days last month. Some of those were just overnight stays. I'm not running a server farm out of my apartment. I understand that, Gerald said, and he almost sounded like he did. But the meter doesn't lie, Maya. Something in that unit is pulling serious wattage, and the building's utility agreement means we need to address it. I'm not accusing you of anything. I just need you to take a look when you're back. She promised she would. She hung up. She missed her flight. Maya's apartment was on the fourth floor of a converted textile building in the Garfield district, the kind of place that had exposed brick and high ceilings and windows that looked romantic in the listing photos and drafty in January. She'd moved in 2 years ago, signing a lease on a gray afternoon not unlike this one, charmed by the original hardwood floors and the fact that her commute, when she actually had a conventional commute, was only 11 minutes. She traveled roughly 10 days out of every month for work, sometimes more. She was a logistics consultant, which meant she existed in the liminal space of airports and conference rooms and hotel breakfasts that always had the same scrambled eggs regardless of the city. Her apartment in many ways was less a home and more a storage unit with a good mattress. When she walked in that Wednesday evening, dragging her suitcase behind her, she tried to see the place the way Gerald must have seen it on paper, as a location generating $412 of electrical consumption every month. She flipped on the lights. The apartment looked exactly as she'd left it 9 days ago. Her coffee mug was still on the counter. A cardigan was draped over the back of the couch. The succulent on the windowsill, the one living thing she'd managed not to kill, leaned slightly toward the last light it had seen. She walked through each room slowly, the way you might walk through a crime scene, looking for evidence of a life more electrically demanding than her own. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Standard, expected. She pressed her hand against the side of it and felt the normal warmth of a compressor doing its job. The fridge was 7 years old, a stainless steel relic left by the previous tenant, and it suddenly occurred to her that she'd never once thought about how old it was or what that might mean for efficiency. She moved to the living room. The television, a 55-inch she'd bought 2 years ago in a moment of domestic optimism, sat dark and silent. But next to it, the entertainment setup glowed with small, persistent lights. The cable box with its clock display, the streaming device, the soundbar in standby mode, the game console she hadn't touched in 4 months but had never unplugged. She counted the little lights. There were 9 of them, 9 devices, drawing power all night, every night, while she slept in hotel rooms in cities that were not this one. She sat down on the couch and opened her laptop, and she began, for the first time, to actually look at where her electricity went. What she found over the next 2 hours was not a single villain. There was no rogue appliance cackling in the corner, no secret room full of grow lights, no explanation dramatic enough to justify the alarm she'd felt at Gerald's voice. What she found instead was something more mundane and somehow more unsettling. A slow, steady, completely invisible drain that had been running in the background of her life without her ever noticing or consenting to it. The old refrigerator, she learned, was likely consuming somewhere between 150 and 200 kilowatt hours per month, nearly double what a modern, efficient model would use. It ran constantly, its aging compressor working harder than it needed to, cooling a space that was largely empty because Maya was rarely home to fill it. The phantom loads, the standby power drawn by her entertainment system, her phone chargers left plugged in, the microwave with its clock, the cable box that apparently never truly slept, added up to somewhere between 50 and 100 kilowatt hours monthly, individually meaningless. Collectively, the equivalent of running an extra refrigerator. The HVAC system was the third piece of the puzzle, and the one that made her put down her laptop and stare at the ceiling for a long moment. She had, without thinking much about it, left the thermostat set to 68 degrees year-round. When she left for a trip, she did not adjust it. When she came back 2 weeks later, it had been faithfully maintaining 68 degrees in an empty apartment, fighting the cold of February and the heat of August with equal mechanical dedication. And she had never once told it not to. She'd been paying to keep her apartment comfortable for no one. There was a knock at her door at 8:30. She opened it to find her neighbor from across the hall, a semi-retired electrician named Desmond who had lived in the building for 11 years and treated newcomers with the particular patience of someone who had seen many newcomers make many predictable mistakes. "Saw your light on," he said, which in Desmond's language meant, "I heard you come home and I wanted to check on you. You look like someone told you bad news." "My power bill," she said, $400. Desmond made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a wince but landed somewhere between the two. "Come on," he said, "let me show you something." He didn't come inside. Instead, he led her down the hall to the utility closet near the elevator, where the building's electrical panels lived behind a metal door that Maya had walked past hundreds of times without ever opening. He didn't open it either. He just pointed at the door and said, "You know what's in there." "Breakers," she said. "Your breakers," he said. "Your unit's draw goes through that panel, and I can tell you because I've lived here long enough to know that the wiring in these units is original, 40 years old." The apartments were built for people who had a television, a refrigerator, and maybe a window unit. They were not built for people with home theaters and always-on internet infrastructure. He said always-on internet infrastructure with the weariness of a man who had been asked to explain Wi-Fi routers more times than he would have preferred. "Your place leaks electricity," he continued. "Not because anything is broken, because nothing is new." Maya leaned against the wall. "So what do I do?" "You start paying attention," Desmond said, as if this were obvious. "Most people don't, they just pay the bill." She spent the following weekend, one of the rare ones she was actually home for the entirety of, doing what Desmond had suggested. She paid attention. She bought a set of smart plugs and installed them on everything in the entertainment unit, programming them to cut power completely between midnight and 6 in the morning, and again whenever she set her location to anything outside the city. She found a smart thermostat at the hardware store down the street and spent a slightly humbling 90 minutes installing it herself, following a YouTube tutorial narrated by a cheerful man in Arizona who made it look effortless. She set up a schedule: 65 degrees when she was away, 68 when she was home, a 30-minute warm-up before her scheduled return so she wouldn't walk into a cold apartment but wouldn't be heating an empty one for days on end. She called the building manager not Gerald but the maintenance coordinator, a woman named Patricia who was blessedly more practical, and asked about the refrigerator. Patricia confirmed it was indeed a building-owned appliance, original to the unit's last renovation, and after Maya forwarded her the energy consumption estimates, she agreed to put in a replacement request. "These old units cost everyone money," Patricia said. "You're not the first tenant to ask." "Hasn't it been replaced already?" Maya asked, a pause. "Because most tenants don't ask," Patricia said. Maya thought about Desmond. "Most people just pay the bill." 6 weeks later, she got another call from Gerald Hutchins. She was in the Minneapolis airport this time, which was an improvement over Denver because Minneapolis had better coffee and more comfortable chairs near the gates. She answered with less dread than she had the first time. "Maya," Gerald said, "I'm looking at your bill for this cycle, and it's $187. She did a small, private celebration that involved squeezing her paper coffee cup slightly too hard and nearly losing the lid. "That's better," she said as calmly as she could manage. "That's significantly better," Gerald agreed, and she could hear in his voice something she hadn't heard the first time, a note of genuine surprise, maybe even respect. "Whatever you did, it worked. I paid attention," she said. After she hung up, she sat for a moment and thought about all the months before the call. All the bills she had paid without looking. All the electricity she had spent heating and lighting and powering a place she wasn't in. All the small machines she had left running in the dark, waiting, humming, glowing, while she slept in other cities and came home only long enough to pack a different bag. She thought about the refrigerator, finally replaced last week, gleaming, efficient, absurdly quiet, and how strange it was that something so mundane could represent such a clear dividing line between before and after. She thought about Desmond, who had lived in the building for 11 years and had probably known on some level what was happening in her unit long before she did. The way he'd pointed at the electrical panel, not to explain it but just to make her see it, to make it real, to make her understand that her apartment was not a passive object but a system, always running, always costing, always demanding something in return for the comfort it provided. The plane home was delayed by 40 minutes, and Maya spent the extra time making a list on her phone. Not a panic list, not a guilt list, just a practical, clear-eyed accounting of what she changed and what she might still change. The smart plugs, the thermostat, the refrigerator. The habit now of unplugging the coffee maker before she left for a trip, of checking the thermostat schedule before she closed the door, of thinking of her apartment not as a place she returned to but as a place she was always, in some small sense, responsible for. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. She hadn't installed solar panels or replaced every bulb with the most expensive LEDs on the market or started hand-washing her clothes to avoid running the dryer. She had just finally, belatedly, because a property manager had called her on a Tuesday morning and used the word alarming, started paying attention. When the plane finally boarded and she settled into her seat, she turned off her phone screen and looked out the window at the tarmac lights blinking in the early dark. She thought, I wonder what else I've been leaving running. The apartment was warm when she got home. Not too warm, exactly 68 degrees because she'd set the schedule right and it had held. The refrigerator made its new, barely audible hum. The entertainment system was dark and genuinely off, not just pretending. She set down her bag. She looked at the succulent on the windowsill, which had turned itself toward the window again in her absence. Following whatever gray November light had managed to get through, she watered it. She made tea. She sat on the couch in the quiet of an apartment that was, for once, only running what she needed. Outside, the city kept its own electrical tabs, storefronts, and streetlights and office towers blazing through the night. But inside these four walls, there was only what she had chosen. The small, warm light above the stove, the kettle cooling on its base, the gentle claim of a space that knew at last when to rest. The bill next month would be lower still, and the month after that lower again, and Gerald Hutchins would never call on a Tuesday morning with that particular tone in his voice, the one that sounded like I'm not accusing you of anything but meant something closer to I think you should look at what you've been doing without noticing. She had looked, she had seen. And now finally, the lights in the empty rooms were off.